invite me and have the opportunity to do my second trip to South America within less year. Well, listening to the three speakers before me, I had the feeling that my job was already done, so I can leave you. All you have to know about animal welfare has been stated in different approach, different way, and I was a little bit puzzled, but I would dare to start just at the same time of my title, which is Animal Welfare in Europe, an interactive construction between philosophy, law, and neurosciences. I would like to add, maybe lose on my time, a few minutes, stating that according to Temple Grandin, she taught us what I recall. Beware of overloading biological systems. This opened the study to the modelization of biological system, which at least at INRA we are involved in. I'm not making publicity about INRA, but I know that in many agronomical institutions there is that trend. But do have to be careful, because when we start modelization about biological system, we are exactly at the opposite approach from Temple Grandin, on farm, on slaughter. And some of my dear colleagues, at least in Paris, they are vaguely aware of what is really the job of running a farm. And there is a major risk. That's the first point. The second warning that Temple Grandin told us was about getting more and more intensive and then using genetic to reduce the insane development. So that is the classical symptoms of the mad scientist, which I am too. And we have to be aware about ourselves, our attitude. The third prescription was, at the same time, do not be too much prescriptive. That means leave the opportunity to create, to invent, on the farm, on the ground. That means very practically. Marcia del Campo insisted in a very broad initial approach to check on geographical origin when we have the pretension, like in Europe, like at OIE, since I am sitting at the welfare committee at OIE, to create universal rules, like science. Science is universal. But, okay, the trajectory of an electron is universal. Maybe the practice in each country is different. So we have to keep that in mind when we want to create universal laws. And Drew Ferguson, in fact, insisted in 3 points. The biology, the emotional state linked to behavior, and the natural aspect. All these related to animal welfare. And what is the role of authorities? Then I come back to my initial purpose. The example of what we have been doing, at least in Europe, creating a kind of permanent interaction between ideology, philosophy, law, and neurosciences. But first of all, I would like to also say that if I belong to INRA, unfortunately with my old age, I'm officially retired, and I'm also working with the International Meat Secretary, IMS, or Oficina Permanente Internacional de la Carne, OPIC. And just a few words to give you a hint about what IMS or OPIC is doing. IMS brings together Meat and Livestock World Organization. We have 90 members, over 30 countries, and they represent more than 75 of the global meat production. IMS is a non-profit making association or a forum for exchanging ideas and experience on international issues, and has representation in international organizations like OIE, FAO, OECD, and also ISO label. And organized every 2 years, the World Meat Congress. The last Congress was in June in Beijing, China. So IMS is the voice of meat industry. Now gets in the problem that we have with animal welfare. In Europe, we had in January of this year, the publication of the Meat Atlas. Could sound okay. But that Meat Atlas has been promoted by the Heinrich Böll Foundation and the Friends of the Earth for Europe. Friends for the Earth. And it is extremely well done, well written, with a large content of documentation. But what it tells you is everything bad about meat you should know. Here we are, in that battle. So let me show you a few covers of books published which are like steps in that battle for, against, I don't know, at least which are linked to that question of animal welfare. Meat is a matter of controversy with ethical and environmental challenge now. That first cover book has been published in 2009 in USA, and this is not the book of a scientist, this is the book of a novelist, a young man around the 30s who suddenly discovered that it was really bad to eat meat after a trip in several slaughterhouses in farms, large farms, and decided to convert himself to vegetarian and to train his family to become vegetarian. A little more than 1 million books sold in a year. That one, from a real philosopher, Bernard Rollin from USA, who wrote that book, The Honeydeed Cry, Animal Consciousness, Animal Pain and Science. It was mainly focused on the use of animal in experimental science and biomedical science. Animal Rights, 2005, again published in USA by Cass Sunstein and Martha Nussbaum. Martha Nussbaum is a very influential philosopher now in the United States and has been carrying a lot of very clever thought and work on the issue of animal consciousness and the difference between what is specific to human as compared to what could be specific to animals. Because there are several animals and not a single animal like lawyers or like philosophers would like to pretend that they are. There is a single human species, but as a biologist, I've never met the animal single. That's a concept, and this is an empty concept. OIE with the Terrestrial Animal Health Code from 2005. And also, this has been mentioned several times, and I took that from International Finance Corporation, so I have bad readings, as you see, creating business opportunity through improved animal welfare. Here we are, in the business. And there is a new discovery for me this week, a more dynamic and positive posture, natural, carnes del Uruguay, de la naturaleza a sua mesa. I enjoy really much that called slogan or advertising. Very wise, I think, especially for Uruguay. So why animal welfare became a society concern in mostly initially Western urbanized countries? Real conditions for food security continue to improve, yet there is more media noise and political challenges every day. Welfareists move from animal protection and welfare to man-animal relations and animal rights issues. That means lawyers are coming into play. Nowadays, arguments developed by animal protection and pro-vegetarian also focus on environmental issues and preservation of nature. So it's a multiple approach that we are faced with. What are the origin of the contemporary concern? This is the philosophical attitude toward animals. And let me play for 5 minutes the old professor and try to bring to you some background on the philosophical issue. Modern philosophers who are, let's say, in defense of animals, they all refer to moral utilitarianism. Moral utilitarianism was a concept or an approach created by an English philosopher of the 18th century, Jeremy Bentham, who wrote in a year which is quite famous, for, at least for the French, 1789, the French Revolution, Principles of Moral and Legislation. And among several major thoughts that he promoted at the end of the 18th century, I am going to quote you one of his sentences in his English of the time. The day may come when the rest of animal creation may acquire those rights which never could have been withheld from them but by the end of tyranny. That means tyranny of man. A full-grown horse or dog is beyond comparison a more rational as well as a more conversable animal than an infant of a day or a week or even a month old. You see the comparison. But suppose the case were otherwise, what would it avail? And this is the main sentence, which is repeated again and again and again by most of the modern and contemporary philosophers initially, and now the NGOs for animal defense. The question is not can they reason nor can they talk, but can they suffer? So the main concept is coming from there. Can they suffer? At the time when Bentham was writing that, as a good English philosopher, he was giving a kick to the French philosopher Descartes. Because, as you might know or remember from school, the issue was, for Descartes, what makes a man. He thinks, he talks. So here is the kind of very precise divergence between the two positions. And then Jeremy Bentham added, why should the law refuse its protection to any sensitive being? That's a major concept, sensitive being. The time will come when humanity will extend its mantle over everything that breathes. Okay. So animal liberation supporters are opposed to a Cartesian position. The idea created by Descartes of an animal machine was a new way to look at living creature at the time. You have to put in the perspective of the history of ideas what the concept of animal machine created, the possibility to create modern biology. We were not inspired anymore by spirits. We were looking at the livings as any kind of any other possibility, like astronomy, physics, or chemistry, which was not the case at the time. So when modern defenders of animals say, oh, Descartes was wrong, they are wrong. They are wrong in respect of the history of ideas of the time. So for Descartes, only human soul made humans different from other animals. But he did recognize the sensitivity of animals. And if you are interested, I can quote you later at lunch letters written by Descartes stating that he does recognize the fact that animals can feel things, can feel pain, can experience fear. But that was different from the concept of animal machine, which could lead to the creation of biology. But in respect to the hypothetic gap between body and soul that we have been fed with, modern neurosciences demonstrated that Descartes was wrong. And in fact, I can refer to the book from another much famous than I am, Antonio Damasio. He is from USA, and he wrote a book Descartes' error, emotion, reason, and the human brain, where he explained the link between the basic constituent of biology, the matter of the biology, and what it has been able to create along the evolution, that is emotion, reason, and the human brain. So this is a good example of animal-machine. Do you believe in that one? No? Not yet. You don't seem enthusiastic. Okay. So where are we? Where are you? From animal-machine to modern meat industry? I'm also quoting a very interesting philosopher of the 20th century, the man who created the character Tintin. And he wrote in 1932, Tintin en Amérique, Tintin in America, where you can find at some stage these two cartoons, a cow entering in a large machine and then getting out in the form of sausage or corned beef. That's what we have, in fact, been doing. And that man, Hergé, was able to recognize that when he visited in the 30s, USA. So now, what are the two basic arguments used by theoreticians of animal liberation? The first one is that difference between human and animals we have been fed with in terms of our ideology, at least in the Western countries. And it has been challenged or rejected on the basis of a moral continuity, since animals, like humans, can suffer. So we are back to Bentham. Animals, like humans, can suffer. So from that basis, you have the continuity between animals and humans. And it's a moral continuity. And the moral now leads you to law, rules, legislation. So this position is linked to the concept that you might be aware of, speciesism. And in speciesism, we recognize species. And it has been built and coined in 1970 by psychologist Richard Ryder, who was not really aware of the issues in the farm. I must tell you, he was living in Cambridge. Okay, Cambridge is green, you have cows, but that's it. But the concept of speciesism is built with that root on species, and they claim that speciesism is the modern differentiation, negative differentiation, as it was carried in the former centuries against the blacks, that means racism, and against the female, by us, the males, sexism. The species became very popular after the book Animal Liberation, published by Peter Singer in 1975. Peter Singer can be regarded historically as the founding father of modern animal liberation movement, and by Tom Regan, another philosopher from USA, The Case of Animal Rights in 1983. Speciesism implies to assign different values and rights to beings on the basis of their species membership. If you give a higher value to a human than to an animal, then you are speciesist. I bet that right now most of you are. This thinking comes from Jeremy Bentham and is in line even with a scientist, Charles Darwin, who wrote in Metaphysics, Materialism and the Evolution of Mind, animals whom we have made our slaves, we do not like to consider our equals. And also, from Peter Singer, all the arguments to prove human superiority cannot ruin this hard fact. In suffering, the animals are our equals, in his book Animal Liberation. The next and very important basic concept linked to the movement of animal welfare is sentience. A sentient being is one that has some ability to evaluate the action of others in relation to itself and third parties, to remember some of its own action and their consequences, to evaluate risk, and to have some feeling, that means sensation, feeling, emotional status, background mood, and to have some degree of awareness of what's going on. This was proposed by a researcher called Donald Broom. This is the definition of a sentient being. That means that in ethics and law, sentience is commonly referred to the capacity to experience pleasure or pain. Thus, animals are all sentient beings. But as a biologist, that I am, that most of you are, we ask, is the sentience level of the paramecy of a worm, of a monkey, of a cow, of a donkey equivalent? Are their nervous system identical? Obviously not. So that raises a problem. So animal welfare, we have two clashing views. That was proposed by David Fraser. We have the romantic agrarian view, most of the time carried by urban citizens. Simple, basic life, nature as an ideal, importance of the emotion, autonomy of individual, and the golden age of the past. And this is opposed to the rational scientific approach, life improved by science and technology. You are. Nature is imperfect. Rationality must be promoted. Production of enterprise, golden age in the future. Here we are. You see what you are? This is just a mirror. Okay, so what are really now the definition of welfare? We have to go from animal needs to husbandry principle. In order to promote the welfare of animals, husbandry parameters must fulfill a given set of conditions that we also refer as animal care. In 1993, the UK-based Farm Animal Welfare Council proposed the famous 5 freedom principle, and I was surprised that no one mentioned them until now. Since then, the 5 freedom principles have been used as the reference by European regulations, OIE welfare codes, and large private actors, which produce guides for good practices. So with welfare 5 freedom, as you might know, I just repeat them, is freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain and injury or disease, freedom to express normal behavior, and freedom from fear and distress. And we are working on that, and we are carrying on that line. But recently in UK again, in 2010, a veterinary proposed a 6th freedom, a life worth living. I was personally really shocked or amazed. A life worth living. That sounds very anthropomorphic. The 5 freedoms are basic needs that we all agree with. The 6th one is an emotional need or is a human projection. Anyhow, this really means a sign of ethical concern. Does a cow can carry the question, am I living a life worth living? That's insane, I think. So back to classics. We have a body going along with biology, physiology, which means health. That's veterinary science, which also means productivity, animal science. And we have, let's say, a mind, animal mind, sentience, sensitivity, which goes along with emotion, behavior. This is the field of the science called ethology, and which goes along with farm practices. That means avoiding negative sensations like pain, feeling bad, and promoting positive experience. That means creating positive reinforcement. That should be welfare. And a good welfare or well-being is an equilibrium between the two, the body and the mind. We are back to Descartes? No, don't be afraid. So, let me introduce you the view of an animal scientist, Mac Inerney, who created a welfare function which was theoretical. He published that in an article in 2002. You have the welfare level, and you have an intensification process. And we have been talking about intensification. So on the left, we have, I think, extensive breeding sheep in Australia. We have been listening that they have some problem. We have grazing cows, and you have the worst, intensive laying eggs. He created the notion of an adaptative zone maintaining level. In that zone, you can act. You can make progress. But beyond that, you have a welfare rupture. That means that you are beyond cruelty threshold. And most of the opponents of farm or food industry think that we are, you are, they are always beyond cruelty threshold. That's a theoretical approach. So ask you where you are exactly. So McInerney went on, the economic role of farm animals is to deliver food products, benefit to consumer. The well-being of an animal is a multivariable outcome. Numerous factors contribute to it: nutrition, health, pain, discomfort, freedom. The level of input, fodder, housing, disease control, environment management, reach a high degree of technology-driven success. Thus, the production has been pushed to the biological limit. Here we are back to one of the messages from Temple Grandin. We are often pushing the limits of the biology. So the animal can respond up to a certain limit, and then we get problem. They get problem. We are faced with a global challenge at the same time: provide animal care and reach well-being, achieve a satisfactory level in human perceived welfare, and feed the world. This has been stated several times. Okay, so quickly now to the European policy. A brief history. Let's go with that one. 40 years of animal welfare. This is a little pamphlet that the European Commission distribute. So I'm not creating that image. With few milestones. 1974, stunning before slaughter is now mandatory, with few exceptions for religious slaughter. Okay. Protection during transport. Requirement on farm about pigs, calves, laying hens. And the first real ethical statement principle was linked to the Treaty of Amsterdam, which is one of the founding treaty of Europe. Then OEE welfare policy started officially in 2005. And we repeated in Europe with the Lisbon Treaty that animals are sentient beings. And now we are in a period of a new animal welfare strategy, 2012-2015, which need to implement EU rules on welfare. And one of the first one was a rule on behavioral need of sow, that means banning individual sow stall. We have been listening to that, but from a different point of view, a very practical point of view from the breeder in USA. So Europe recognized animal as sentient being. You see one of these two main topics that we are discussing. Animals are sentient beings deserving protection. This is written in the Amsterdam Treaty in 1997. So how can we apply this general statement and combine scientific fact with European animal welfare policy? Well, the community legislation sets minimum requirements in order to spare animals from any unnecessary suffering in three main areas: farming, transport, slaughter. This is written in one of our Council directives. But that's theoretical. And we were happy because we had law. And the law is for everyone. And we started 7 countries in Europe. Now we are 28. Then we are facing practical problems. In Europe, welfare principles have been translated into legislation and rules for each country. But what about implementation and real practice now? I just show you one example which was the result of a research program called Welfare Quality, and the subtitle was From Farm to Fork. And the question was, how do we measure a welfare level? Temple Grandin also referred to that. Can we happen to have a scoring, a single scoring with animal welfare, and then provide subsidies from Europe? Okay, so we have on the left the welfare principle, good feeding, with several welfare criteria like absence of prolonged hunger, absence of prolonged thirst, so you can find the trace of the 5 freedoms I was mentioning. And then you have the measure foreseen in welfare quality for dairy cows, as an example. So you send an inspector in the farm, and he's looking at, well, what is the body condition score? What is the water supply? And here we go. Good feeding, good housing, good health, appropriate behavior. And that turned into 12 criteria and 36 indices to finally, thanks to a very smart, I would say, academic performance in a single score. As Temple Grandin pointed in the article in Mid-Science, this is a good research tool, but highly too complex and time-consuming for routine audits. That means useless. 4 years of research, and smart research, I can tell you. But I'm not kidding. It was really clever. Thus, we have problem in implementing Europe legislation on animal welfare. That's where we are. The European Commission is currently encouraging difficulties to implement animal welfare legislation. Some of these difficulties have been associated to a lack of knowledge by actors of the food. Stakeholders, farmer, producer, organizations, supply chain, NGOs may face difficulties in interpreting the legislation, or may not be familiar enough with the range of options available for implementation. That's the verdict. So we are faced with a problem. We have a huge construction which seems to be perfect. And beyond the few core countries of Europe, we are faced with problems. I'm not pointing some of our countries in Europe, but obviously it doesn't work right now. So we have programs for teaching, we have programs for implementing, but we are still doing that. How can we implement our wonderful law? So what Europe could and should do now? What are the current development trends in Europe for welfare policy? Well, provide animal handlers with a minimum list of criteria to monitor husbandry condition and management practice on the basis of outcome-based measurables. That means that we have shifted our mind, our politicians, our lawyers, started to think that something is not going that well. So we have to go back to the animal and take these outcome-based measurables. And we have to use animal-based measures. 2 objectives: get an overview of the welfare status of the animals and monitor specific issues. Some animal-based measures depend on the farming system, like local feasibility, reliability issues. For instance, a farm in Normandy in France or a farm in the center of Germany is not in the same condition in terms of feasibility, reliability issues as a farm in Romania. Although these rules pretend to be covering the 28 countries of Europe. So think about the problem we have, when we think about the world. For a given principle, end user of a standard should select the most accurate animal-based measure adapted to their own farming system. That's one of the strong new messages. And this is, for instance, goes for the case of human-animal relationship. It does not rely on the same practical measure in outdoor extensive system as compared to indoor system. That's obvious. And that might have led your petition to OIE that I would like to have in my pocket when I go back, since I'm sitting on the welfare committee. Anyhow, I'm just raising, that's me, raising that question. Are we going back towards a more adaptive country practice or local culture condition? That would be wise, in my opinion. Anyhow. So I've been telling you from the initial part of that talk that philosophers working on the status of animal or animal rights emphasize on the fact that animal can suffer. Okay, well. But according to the International Association for the Study of Pain, EASP, which is a distinguished society of neuroscientists, psychiatrists, neurologists, but also some philosophers, they spend some time to try to define what is pain. Might be strange to you because you know what is pain. But you refer to your sensory experience, your past history. But what is pain? So they produced that definition, and they came with the idea that suffering is different from pain. I insist on that point because suffering is the word used by Jeremy Bentham, used by Peter Singer, and repetitively used by NGOs, organizations like PETA, WSPA, and so on and so on. Suffering. Suffering concerns you, human. You can suffer. You experience pain. But when you use that word in a slogan, you suffer, they suffer, you induce the projection. And that's the trick they use. So, pain, definition. Unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage or describes in terms of such damage. Quite complicated. And they had 3 different word meetings, talking about pain, the mechanism of pain, the way to cure pain. But they spend some time, each time, and at the end of the 3 years, they end up with that definition. But that definition works for humans and was created by humans. So, 2 vets thought that it was not really applicable to animals, and they proposed a working definition for animals, and that working definition is still in use. Aversive sensory and emotional experience representing an awareness of damage or threat to the integrity of own tissue. You can see that you change from unpleasant to aversive. Unpleasant that you can refer to, you can use word, you can comment. Aversive is linked to the behavior that human can observe. And there is the emotional part for sure, and also the awareness of damage. Awareness is something different from self-consciousness. You are aware of something. An animal is very likely aware of being living, of being eaten by my food. Yeah, sure. Or he might anticipate and have a threat about a nasty treatment that he experienced before. So that's the way we start in neurosciences to approach the question, the issue of pain. Neuroscientists, they proposed initially a new word, not instead of pain. Going along, nociception. It was created from 2 words. Nocivus comes from the Latin, means noxious, and reception, the reception of what is noxious. It was proposed by an English neuroscientist called Sherrington, who won not for that definition, but who won the Nobel Prize in the 30s. This is a specific sensory modality activated by a stimulus able to damage normal tissue. That means, like vision, like audition, like touch, we are equipped with nociception. That means that we have nociceptors, that is, a receptor preferentially sensitive to a noxious stimulus. And neurosciences focused on pain spend at least 30 years demonstrating the existence and characterizing the different type of nociceptors, some related to mechanical noxious stimuli, some other related to chemical noxious stimuli, some other related to thermic noxious stimuli. Pain and nociception are different. Nociception is the elementary sensory experience which create motor response used in neuroscience to demonstrate that there is some nociceptive stimulus applied to a body. The tail flick reaction in a rat or the leg withdrawal if you pinch a leg. It only involves the medulla. Yeah, I have only 5 minutes to teach you all the neuroscience about pain. You ready? Okay. So that part involves only spinal circuits and lower brainstem. No need to be smart to experience nociception. When I was young, I was going to the biology lesson and the teaching practices, and we had frogs at that time. We were cutting the medulla, and we were applying either a pinch or a drop of acetic acid, and you could see the leg of the frog doing that. Okay? But the frog was not aware. Only spinal cord reflexes. Okay. Pain is different. Pain is the emotional experience added to the sensory experience. So it's a much more complex sensation. It's more difficult to evaluate than a simple nociceptive reflex. It involves higher sensory motor integrative population and emotionally competent brain circuits. We have specialized, animals. I'm still in the old-fashioned, me and them. They have competent brain circuits linked to emotion. And suffering now. But the same institution created that definition, a state of emotional distress associated with events that threaten the biological and the psychological integrity of the individual. Suffering often goes along with severe pain, but can occur in absence of pain, as you unfortunately might know. Thus, pain and suffering have different phenomenological status. Pain is related to the physical side, but can be controlled by the mind. Pain is linked to negative emotion like anxiety, distress. Suffering implies a self-conscious subject who is aware to be the subject of a sensory and emotional experience. Let's try to apply that to most of the animal species. Maybe it goes for higher primates. Maybe it goes for the whales that you see in the bay. We are not sure of that. And this incorporates long-term and major adverse effect on the self-image. The self-image, that means I, the basis of what is me. That implies, at the minimum, a representation of the body. Many animals have a kind of representation of the body, but if you start looking carefully and in depth to the representation of the body surface in different species, you very quickly, along the phylogenetic chain, losing a lot of acuity. So the case of pain, and it's an integrated approach that we carried at INRA in 2009, and the Ministry of Agriculture asked us to produce a report on the case of pain, and that's when neuroscience come into play, when politicians or policy ask us questions. And we produce a scientific report, like a dictionary, a heavy thing, called Animal Pain, Identifying, Understanding, and Minimizing Pain in Farm Animals. And we extracted from that in 2012 in the review Animal, Minimizing Pain in Farms Animal, the 3S approach called suppress, substitute and foods, which can be applied to farm animals. And very recently, the synthetic version of that big report has been published in Advances in Animal Bioscience in June this year, where we have several quite long chapters, the question of animal pain, the issues for debate, pain definition, concept, and mechanism in human and farm animal. I'm one of the co-authors. How should pain in farm animal be assessed? Source of known and potential pain in farm animal. This is now accessible in English, because before that was not existing on Earth since it was in French. Okay? Well, so I end up. Shall you give me 2-3 minutes? I promise. These are two. Okay. These are two schemas. The first one is a schema of a nervous system. At the bottom part, you have the medulla, the spinal cord. On the upper part, you have various structures belonging to the brain. When you start with a nociceptive stimulus, you enter the spinal cord through nervous fiber. There is a synapse, a contact, and then it goes up to the telencephalon, the higher part of the telencephalon with the cortex. Okay, with only one synapse at the level of that structure called thalamus. You have also in parallel a second pathway in brown. That second pathway has multiple relays along, so it takes more time for the information to reach the cortex, but it also integrates many other parts, such as the part involved in emotion. The blue system is called the lateral pathway, works on analytical component of the sensation that might give you the hint about is it hot, is it cold, is it burning, is it crunching, etc. And the second pathway is the aversive, carry the aversive component and the emotion. But that system, which has been studied in details, including thanks to the technology of brain imaging, works for humans. Already with some primates, we are not exactly with the same share. So you see, we are not exactly the same in terms of neuronal organization. And then that cooperation between the analytical component and the aversive component creates the sensory conscious awareness. That's when you say, something is happening. And then you lead for the action. So pain is a multi-component sensation. You have the nociceptive stimuli. And you have the sensation, the cognition, and the emotion part. The integration of these three poles create the subjective experience of pain, what you call pain. What maybe they call pain. They don't call, they live, they experience. But the cognition and the emotion can be modulated by two variables, two parameters, the physical and the social environment. That means that in a herd, according to the fact you are the dominant or the dominated, according to the fact you are in extensive or intensive, you will not process this information in the same way. And you have also the early experience, the conditioning. The early experience and the conditioning needs memory, makes the evaluation of the situation, and when you have the evaluation, which is a kind of highly complex series of reflex conditions, you create the emotion. When you have the emotion, you have the motivation to do something, to escape, to move, or to resign. And then the kind of consciousness emerges. That's what we share with the animals, with different levels. And I would finish on that and wanted to insist on the fact that thanks to neurosciences, I'm also quoting Temple Grandin, who asked in 2004, what does really matters? Is it fear, pain, or physical stress? And in fact, what we know about the function of the brain help us maybe to approach and to anticipate how we could prevent some kind of painful or stressful or distress experience. Thank you for your kind attention.